Hello, this is Rayme Jurmain with my news of the day, starting with reading about the Epstein files reports from different YouTubers, after which I will review a response of Tariq Marcus Sanders nashed about Deante cutting him with sharp words about his hateful group called FBA, supporting Trump in fighting against immigrants. Starting with reading a report of a YouTube video about the Epstein files and alleged Israeli involvement. This video is a political commentary and discussion segment from the channel The Young Turks. The speakers analyze recently released Epstein-related documents and argue that the material suggests possible connections between Jeffrey Epstein and Israeli intelligence. The tone of the video is emotional, confrontational, and strongly critical of mainstream media and government institutions. The presenters claim that Epstein was not only a wealthy criminal figure but also someone with political and intelligence connections. They repeatedly refer to emails, FBI documents, and unnamed confidential sources that allegedly mention links to Mossad and influential financial families. Throughout the discussion, they question why large news organizations are not giving more attention to these claims, and suggest that media outlets are deliberately avoiding the topic. A major theme of the video is distrust. The hosts express distrust toward governments, intelligence agencies, and corporate journalism. They argue that powerful interests protect certain narratives while ignoring others. The speakers also compare how different countries are covered in the news, suggesting that some nations receive harsher scrutiny than others. This comparison is used to support their belief that there is selective reporting and political bias. Another important element is the use of rhetorical questions and speculation. The presenters often ask what consequences there would be if certain allegations were proven true, while also acknowledging that some information is based on confidential or unverified sources. Even though they sometimes mention the need for verification, the overall tone leans toward suspicion and accusation rather than neutrality. The video also includes criticism of political figures and media personalities who continue to invite certain legal experts onto their shows. The hosts interpret this as a sign of protection or avoidance rather than balanced journalism. In addition, there is a brief commercial interruption, after which the discussion continues with similar themes of media silence and political influence. From a viewer's perspective, the video mixes factual references, opinion, and speculation. It appeals strongly to emotions such as anger and frustration, and it encourages the audience to question official narratives. However, because many claims rely on interpretation or secondary reporting, the content requires critical thinking and independent verification. In conclusion, the video functions less as a neutral news report and more as an opinion-driven analysis. Its main message is that powerful institutions may hide or minimize certain stories, and that viewers should remain skeptical and search for information themselves. The style is persuasive and provocative, aiming to spark debate rather than provide a balanced overview. My next news is Epstein Speaks. Reading a report about Jeffrey Epstein talking to Steve Bannon posted on DJ Vlad YouTube channel. This video presents a long-form recorded conversation between Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon, later uploaded by the DJ Vlad YouTube channel. The material is not structured like a traditional news interview with clear segments or editorial framing. Instead, it unfolds as an extended dialogue that blends personal storytelling, financial theory, philosophical reflection, and subtle image management. The atmosphere alternates between casual conversation and intellectual sparring, with both participants attempting to guide the direction of the discussion toward their own interests. Conversational dynamics. A key feature of the video is the power dynamic between interviewer and interviewee. Steve Bannon often adopts a direct and probing tone, asking questions that are designed to elicit personal insight or emotional reaction. Jeffrey Epstein, by contrast, frequently responds in abstract or intellectual terms, redirecting questions about personal morality or responsibility into broader discussions about systems, finance, or philosophy. This creates a noticeable tension. One participant seeks specificity and accountability, while the other leans toward generalization and detachment. The rhythm of the dialogue is uneven. At times, Bannon presses for concise answers, while Epstein responds with extended analogies or theoretical explanations. This mismatch gives the impression that each participant is pursuing a slightly different agenda. Bannon appears interested in exposing contradictions or gaining admissions, whereas Epstein seems focused on maintaining control over his narrative and presenting himself as intellectually superior or emotionally unaffected. Theme 1. Elite networks and social access. One of the central themes is Epstein's relationship with elite institutions and influential individuals. He references involvement with prestigious organizations, advisory boards, and academic circles. Rather than portraying these connections as social achievements, he frames them as outcomes of intellectual merit or financial expertise. He emphasizes technical skill and analytical thinking, suggesting that these qualities granted him access rather than wealth or status alone. Bannon's questioning challenges this framing. He repeatedly asks how someone with a background in trading and finance could move so easily into rarefied social and institutional circles. The implication is that access to elite networks is rarely based solely on merit. This back and forth reveals a broader social question about power structures. Are elite spaces governed by knowledge, money, influence, or hidden relationships? The conversation does not resolve this question but instead highlights its complexity. Theme 2. Finance, banking, and economic systems. A substantial portion of the interview centers on financial systems and economic theory. Epstein discusses concepts such as assets, liabilities, credit structures, and fractional reserve banking. He argues that most political leaders and members of the public do not truly understand how money circulates or how banking institutions function. According to his perspective, economic misunderstanding leads to poor governance and misguided policy decisions. He frequently uses metaphors to illustrate his points, particularly medical or biological analogies. For example, he compares the economy to the human body, suggesting that it consists of interconnected organs and processes that no single expert fully comprehends. This analogy reinforces his broader argument about systemic complexity. Just as doctors specialize in different parts of the body, economists and policymakers understand only fragments of the financial system. Bannon's reactions to these explanations vary. At times he appears intrigued, while at other moments he redirects the conversation toward practical implications, such as responsibility during financial crises or the real-world consequences of systemic risk. The tension between theory and application becomes evident, revealing two different approaches to discussing finance. One abstract and conceptual, the other pragmatic and accountability-oriented. Theme 3. Complexity and artificial intelligence. Another recurring topic is complexity theory and technological advancement, particularly artificial intelligence and neural networks. Epstein references research institutions known for studying complex adaptive systems. He suggests that modern technology produces outcomes that even creators cannot fully predict or interpret. This idea is used as an extension of his economic arguments. Just as AI systems can behave unpredictably, so too can global financial markets. The discussion of artificial intelligence serves two functions. First, it positions Epstein as intellectually engaged with advanced scientific ideas, reinforcing his self-image as a thinker rather than merely a financier. Second, it supports his broader narrative that systems, whether economic or technological, are inherently opaque and resistant to full human control. This perspective subtly shifts responsibility away from individuals and toward abstract systemic forces. Theme 4. The financial crisis. The 2008 financial crisis emerges as a dramatic point in the conversation. Epstein recounts being incarcerated during the collapse of major financial institutions. He describes the irony of experiencing a global economic meltdown while physically confined and largely disconnected from external information. This anecdote is presented almost philosophically, as if it symbolizes the unpredictability of life and markets. Bannon uses this moment to question the contrast between Epstein's claimed financial acumen and his personal circumstances at the time. The exchange highlights themes of irony, reputation, and the limits of expertise. It also touches on broader issues such as moral hazard, derivatives trading, and systemic fragility. Rather than delivering a clear economic analysis, the segment blends personal narrative with reflections on structural weakness in global finance, personality, and self-presentation. Throughout the video, Epstein's manner of speaking is controlled and measured. He often portrays himself as emotionally detached, emphasizing rational thought over sentiment. This self-presentation aligns with his frequent references to systems, data, and intellectual frameworks. He appears intent on crafting an image of analytical superiority and emotional resilience. Bannon attempts to disrupt this image by asking questions that invite personal reflection or acknowledgement of vulnerability. He probes for signs of regret, moral positioning, or emotional response. Epstein typically redirects these inquiries back to abstract discussions, thereby maintaining distance from overt self-criticism. This interaction creates a subtle psychological contest. One participant pushes toward introspection, while the other deflects toward theory. A rhetorical technique. Several rhetorical techniques are evident in the conversation. Analogy and metaphor. Epstein consistently employs metaphors, especially biological ones, to explain complex ideas. This technique makes abstract concepts more accessible, but also allows him to avoid direct accountability by shifting focus to systems rather than individuals. Redirection. When confronted with uncomfortable or personal questions, he often redirects toward technical or philosophical topics. This strategy maintains control over the narrative and prevents the conversation from becoming overtly confessional. Persistence. Bannon uses repetition and reframing to push for clearer answers. By asking similar questions in slightly different ways, he attempts to break through abstraction and reach personal or concrete responses. Intellectual framing. Both participants frequently frame arguments in intellectual or academic language, which gives the discussion an air of seriousness, even when topics become speculative or subjective. Tone and atmosphere. The tone of the video is neither entirely hostile nor entirely friendly. Instead, it occupies a middle ground characterized by cautious engagement. There is mutual respect in the sense that both participants allow each other extended speaking time, yet there is also an undercurrent of skepticism. The absence of a live audience reduces performative theatrics, but the awareness of eventual public viewing keeps the conversation guarded. The pacing is slow and deliberate. Long pauses, extended explanations, and layered analogies create a reflective atmosphere rather than a rapid exchange. This pacing invites viewers to focus on nuance and subtext rather than quick soundbites. Viewer interpretation and critical thinking. For viewers, the video functions as both a source of information and a study in rhetoric and self-presentation. It contains factual references, personal opinions, and speculative reasoning interwoven in a way that requires critical evaluation. Because the conversation is not moderated by a neutral journalist or fact-checking framework, audiences must distinguish between verifiable claims and subjective interpretation on their own. The length and depth of the dialogue also encourage viewers to observe nonverbal cues, conversational strategies, and shifts in tone. These elements reveal as much about the participants' intentions as the spoken content itself. The interview becomes less about extracting definitive truths and more about understanding how influential figures construct narratives about themselves and the systems they inhabit. Overall assessment. The DJ Vlad upload of the Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon conversation operates as a hybrid of intellectual debate, personal narrative, and reputational management. It is not a traditional investigative piece, nor is it purely casual dialogue. Instead, it occupies a space between documentary record and philosophical discussion. The primary value of the video lies in its exposure of conversational dynamics, rhetorical strategies, and thematic intersections between finance, power, and personal identity. Rather than delivering clear conclusions, the interview leaves many issues open-ended. Questions about responsibility, influence, and systemic complexity remain unresolved. My next news is, according to the Breaking Point's YouTube channel, the Epstein files show that many well-known billionaires, technology leaders, and political figures had more extensive communication or social contact with Jeffrey Epstein than some of their earlier public statements suggested. The hosts emphasized that the documents being discussed are not a single secret report but a collection of emails, scheduling notes, flight logs, address books, and legal filings that together create a picture of how Epstein interacted with influential circles over many years. Their main argument is not that every person named committed crimes, but that the level of association, frequency of contact, and tone of private communication sometimes appear inconsistent with later public distancing. According to their discussion, The files show numerous email exchanges that include invitations to events, travel coordination, introductions to other powerful individuals, and casual greetings. The hosts focus heavily on the wording of these emails, suggesting that friendly or informal language can indicate a closer relationship than what was publicly acknowledged. They argue that even when messages are brief or logistical, the repetition of contact across months or years can imply an ongoing familiarity rather than a one-time interaction. However, they also acknowledge that an email alone does not prove wrongdoing. Instead, they present it as evidence of connection and proximity. The Breaking Points segment further states that the files show flight records and travel references that place certain public figures on planes or in destinations associated with Epstein's social network. The hosts stress that travel logs do not automatically demonstrate illegal activity, yet they view them as important because they establish timelines and physical presence. In their interpretation, repeated travel or multiple shared locations raise questions about the depth of the relationship. They emphasize that context is essential, but they frame these records as part of a broader pattern rather than isolated incidents. Another point raised is that the files show address books and contact directories containing the names and phone numbers of hundreds of influential people across politics, finance, academia, and entertainment. Breaking Points presents these lists as evidence that Epstein maintained a very wide network of elite contacts. At the same time, they note that the mere existence of a name in a contact book does not equal friendship or collaboration. Still, the hosts argue that such directories demonstrate how deeply embedded Epstein was in high-status social environments, contradicting the idea that he was a marginal or isolated figure. The channel also reports that the files show self-written notes and internal emails created by Epstein himself. These documents sometimes contain personal claims, disputes, or recollections of interactions. Breaking Points treats these with caution, reminding viewers that a person writing about themselves or others is not the same as independent verification. Nevertheless, they highlight these notes as revealing Epstein's mindset and strategy, suggesting he may have been very aware of the reputational power of documentation and record-keeping. The hosts interpret this as part of a broader theme of leverage, influence, and image control. According to their commentary, the files show differences between public denial and private familiarity. This is presented as the central narrative thread. The hosts repeatedly compare televised interviews or public statements with the tone and timing of private correspondence. Their argument is that inconsistencies do not automatically imply criminal behavior, but they do raise ethical and reputational questions. They frame the issue less as a legal verdict and more as a matter of credibility and transparency. Breaking Points also says the files show how elite social networks overlap across industries. Technology entrepreneurs, financiers, philanthropists, academics, and political advisors appear in overlapping circles within the documents. The hosts interpret this as evidence that influence often flows through informal social channels rather than purely professional ones. They argue that these overlaps help explain how Epstein retained access to powerful environments despite controversy surrounding him. In their view, the documents illustrate how reputation, wealth, and neutral introductions can maintain social doors that might otherwise close. Another recurring statement from the channel is that the files show the limits of media narratives. The hosts criticize mainstream coverage for, in their opinion, underreporting or selectively emphasizing certain associations. They suggest that independent media discussions emerged partly because the raw documents allowed viewers to examine primary material themselves. In this framing, the files become symbols of transparency as well as controversy. The presenters encourage audiences to read original sources where possible rather than relying solely on summaries. They also emphasize that the files show a distinction between association and guilt. While the tone of the segment is skeptical and sometimes sarcastic, the hosts do clarify that communication or travel does not equal participation in crimes. This disclaimer appears several times, though it is often followed by rhetorical questions or expressions of disbelief about inconsistencies. The result is a style that mixes caution with suspicion, leaving viewers to form their own conclusions, while still guiding them emotionally toward doubt about elite accountability. According to Breaking Points, the files show patterns rather than single revelations. No one document is presented as definitive proof of a grand conspiracy. Instead, the significance lies in accumulation. multiple emails, multiple invitations, multiple meetings, and repeated social intersections. The hosts argue that patterns create narratives, and narratives influence public trust. Their focus is therefore not solely on legal liability but on the broader cultural perception of power, privilege, and responsibility. Finally, the channel maintains that the files show how documentation can reshape public memory. Once private communications become public, past statements are re-examined under a new lens. Breaking Points portrays this as a reminder that transparency can alter reputations even when it does not lead to legal consequences. In their overall interpretation, the Epstein files function less as a final judgment and more as a catalyst for ongoing scrutiny, debate, and re-evaluation of how influential individuals manage their public and private personas. My next news is based on a news article published by Novelando and covers a public dispute between former United States President Donald Trump and comedian and television host Trevor Noah following comments made during the Grammy Awards ceremony. According to Novelando, the controversy began when Trevor Noah, who was hosting the Grammy Awards, made a satirical joke while presenting the Song of the Year category. In his monologue, Noah referenced Donald Trump's well-known interest in acquiring Greenland and linked it humorously to the case of Jeffrey Epstein. He joked that Trump might need a new island to spend time on since Epstein's island no longer exists, also mentioning former President Bill Clinton as part of the punchline. The remark was intended as comedy, but it touched on a sensitive and widely discussed subject. Jeffrey Epstein, a financier who had been convicted and imprisoned for crimes involving the abuse of minors, died in prison in August 2019. Because of the seriousness of his crimes and the many public figures who were at some point socially or professionally connected to him, any reference to Epstein continues to attract strong reactions in political and media discussions. The Novelando article reports that Donald Trump responded forcefully through a post on his social media platform, Truth Social. In his message, Trump denied ever visiting Epstein's private island or being anywhere near it. He stated that, until Noah's comment, he had never been accused by major news outlets of having gone there. Trump described the joke as false and defamatory and used harsh language toward the presenter, calling him poor and talentless. He also threatened to send his lawyers to pursue legal action for defamation and financial damages. The article emphasizes that Trump has not been charged with any crime related to Jeffrey Epstein. The issue at hand is not a legal accusation, but rather a dispute over a public joke made during a live broadcast. Novelando presents the situation as an example of how satire directed at political leaders can quickly escalate into controversy, especially when it involves real criminal cases or sensitive historical events. Another key point highlighted is the role of entertainment platforms such as award ceremonies. Hosts often include political humor in their speeches, knowing that their remarks will reach a global audience. However, when those jokes involve serious allegations or controversial figures, the reaction can be intense and immediate. Social media further amplifies these moments, turning brief comedic lines into widespread news stories within hours. Overall, the Novelando report frames the incident as a clash between comedy and political reputation. It illustrates how humor, public perception, and social media responses can intersect to create major headlines. The exchange between Trevor Noah and Donald Trump shows how a single joke delivered on stage can lead to public denials, legal threats, and international discussion, even when no formal legal accusation exists. My next news is in the next video. I am Rayme Jurmain and will now continue with a review of Tariq Nasheed's response to Deante Kyle rebuking him and his so-called hate group called FBA Gang.
Yeah, man. Yesterday I made a video about where Tariq Bay was showing Tariq Nasheed limping, and I found it also on X that he's limping, man. So when he's really 3/5 of a man, literally, he's hurting. That's why he's coming out here cussing out people. You understand, Negro? Yeah. And I've seen this guy Deante Kyle, and I've made a video on about the part where he was also cutting Tariq Nasheed, and Tariq Nasheed came out to respond and to it in a lot of pain, man. Like Tariq Nasheed, many people already came out that they are not FBA. FBA is just like the BD gang or the GD gang or the Bloods and the Crips. made up stuff, nigga. It's not real. Yeah, we know Africans from America. If you ain't that, sorry for you, man. Feel sorry for your mom. Yeah, let's check here what Tariq Nasheed was saying about this Deante Kyle. Yeah, because this Deante Kyle was cutting him deep. I've shown you that already in the other